I'm not worth much, sir, but I can cook, the rejected Omega told the lone Alpha King. Even the sun, when it tried to break through, seemed hesitant, as if afraid of revealing the scars left on the land. Villages lay scattered between forests that had once burned in old wars, leaving behind twisted black trees and ash-covered soil. In one of these villages on the edge of the shadowed forest lived a man named Urindor. He was called an Omega, a title that marked him as weak in the eyes of some. Once, he had been noble-born, part of a family that prided itself on strength and power. But they had cast him out, saying he was worthless. Worthless, Urindor thought, was a word that stuck to him like a shadow. Yet even in exile he had one small skill that brought him a kind of quiet pride. He could cook. Urindor moved through the smoky kitchen of his small hut, stirring a pot of stew over a wood fire. The smell of simmering herbs and fresh bread filled the room. Cooking was his escape, his small act of control in a world that had otherwise rejected him. Sometimes he imagined that if he could make something beautiful and nourishing, even the world might forget his past failures for a moment. It was on such a morning, when the wind carried the scent of wet earth and ash, that the messenger arrived. He was a tall man draped in the black and gold of the king's court, his eyes hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. Urindor's heart tightened at the sight. Visitors were rare, and visitors from the castle were rarer still. "You are summoned to the castle," the messenger said. His voice was flat without warmth. "His Majesty wishes to see you today." Urindor's hands froze on the wooden spoon. The castle, the Alpha King, the ruler feared across the land. Why him? He had done nothing remarkable, nothing at all. I am not worthy," Urindor said quietly, almost to himself. "You will come," the messenger said, turning to leave, "or you will answer for your refusal," and with that he was gone. Urindor looked at the simmering stew, at the small wooden table, at the cracked walls of his humble hut. His life had always been quiet, simple, and lonely, but it had been safe. Now it was about to change. He packed what little he owned: a knife, a bundle of herbs, and a loaf of bread. As he walked toward the forest path that led to the castle, the wind whispered through the blackened trees, carrying the memory of old fires. Urindor wondered if he would survive the journey, not because of the forest, but because of the king he was about to meet. The castle rose from the hill like a dark monument. Its towers were tall, sharp, and cold against the sky, with banners of gold and black fluttering even in the still air. Urindor felt a mixture of awe and fear. Many whispered that the Alpha King, Kaelin, had a heart as cold as stone, that he trusted no one, and that he had survived countless betrayals that would have broken any ordinary man. When Urindor entered the main hall, he felt the weight of silence pressing down on him. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting battles long past, knights in gleaming armor, and kings who had ruled with iron hands. At the far end of the hall sat Kaelin, tall and imposing, his dark eyes sharp like a hawk's. Even seated, the king radiated authority, a presence that made the entire hall seem smaller. "You are the Omega who claims he can cook," Kaelin said, his voice low, deep, and smooth. There was no anger in it, only curiosity, and that was more dangerous. Urindor's hands clenched. I am," he stammered. "Sir, I can cook well, yes, but I am not worthy of the castle or your time." Kaelin's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Not worthy," he repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me, Omega, what makes you think you are unworthy of anything?" Urindor swallowed. The words stuck in his throat. He had spent his life believing he was not enough. I failed my family, sir. I was cast out. I have nothing to offer but food and the little skills I know." Kaelin studied him silently for a long moment as if weighing his soul. Then he said simply, "Very well, you will cook for me. If your food pleases me, perhaps your worth will be proven. If it does not," his eyes darkened, a hint of warning in the shadow, "you will regret it." Urindor's heart pounded, but he nodded. "I will do my best, sir," he whispered. The kitchens of the castle were unlike any Erendor had seen. They were vast, with hanging racks of gleaming pots and pans, shelves lined with spices from distant lands, and ovens that glowed like captured sunlight. Yet, despite the grandeur, the kitchens felt cold and unwelcoming. Every movement he made was watched by chefs who were skeptical, some even scornful. Erendor set to work. He prepared a simple meal: roasted vegetables with herbs, bread baked fresh from the oven, and a stew simmered to perfection. He moved quietly, carefully, letting the rhythm of cooking soothe the tension in his chest. Finally, the food was ready. A messenger carried it to the king's hall. Erendor followed, feeling a mix of dread and hope. He entered to see Kaelin sitting at the long, dark table, his eyes fixed on the dishes before him. The hall was silent, the kind of silence that held both judgment and anticipation. Kaelin took a fork, tasted the stew, and paused. A long moment passed. Erendor's chest tightened. Then the king looked up. "This is good," he said quietly. Not praise, not joy, but a faint acknowledgement enough to make Erendor's heart leap. The king's expression remained guarded, but there was something else there, a spark of interest. "You have skill," Kaelin said. "But skill alone does not make one worthy. Tell me, Omega, why do you cook?" Erendor hesitated. Few had ever asked him that. "Because I can make life feel a little lighter," he said finally. "Even if the world is harsh, a warm meal can give someone hope." Kaelin's dark eyes softened for the briefest instant, a shadow of understanding passing over his face. Then he nodded once. "Very well, you will stay. For now, cook for me. Learn the ways of this castle. Perhaps you will find your worth yet." Erendor felt a flicker of hope. To stay in the castle under the watchful eyes of the Alpha King was terrifying, but it was also a chance to prove himself, a chance to be more than the shadow of his past. Days passed, and Erendor worked tirelessly in the kitchens, learning the castle's rhythms, the timing of meals, and the preferences of Kaelin. The king remained distant, watching from his throne with that unyielding gaze, yet the Omega could feel small shifts: a nod, a quiet word, a glance that lingered too long. One evening, after a long day of cooking and serving, Erendor stood alone in the courtyard. The sun was setting behind the towers, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. The wind whispered through the stone corridors, carrying the faint scent of smoke and ash. He thought of his past, of the village he had left behind, of the family who had cast him aside. And yet, for the first time, he felt the stirrings of possibility. The quiet was broken by a voice behind him. "Omega." He turned to see Kaelin approaching, his cloak trailing on the ground, eyes unreadable. "Come," the king said, "walk with me." They moved through the silent castle gardens, the air crisp and heavy with the scent of frost. For a long time neither spoke. Then Kaelin said, softly, almost as if testing the words, "You do not fear me." Erendor shook his head. I fear failure more than I fear you, sir." Kaelin stopped walking and looked at him. "Failure can be dangerous here," he said, "but so can trust. Tell me, Omega, can you trust me?" Erendor hesitated. Trust was not a word he used lightly. But as he met Kaelin's dark, searching eyes, he felt something he had not felt in a long time, a spark of courage. "I will try," he whispered. Kaelin nodded once, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "Good, because you will need courage. And in time, you may discover that even those cast aside have a place in this world." Erendor watched the Alpha King walk away, the shadow of the towers stretching long across the courtyard. His heart pounded with both fear and anticipation. He had survived this first test, but he knew the path ahead would be far more challenging. And yet, for the first time in his life, he dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, he had a place in the world after all. And as the night fell, cold and silent, a single thought lingered in Erendor's mind. "Perhaps I am not worthless, not if I can cook and not if I can survive the shadow of this king." The castle had a life of its own. Its halls were alive with whispers, the creaking of wooden floors and the faint echo of footsteps long gone. Even in the brightest rooms, shadows lingered, curling in corners like smoke from a dying fire. Erendor had begun to understand that living here meant more than cooking. It meant navigating a world of silence, subtle power, and unspoken rules. He moved through the kitchens as he had for days, quietly, carefully. His hands had become steady, his mind alert. The other cooks watched him with suspicion at first, but Erendor's skill could not be ignored. The bread he baked rose golden and soft. The stews simmered with perfect flavor, and even the smallest touches, fresh herbs, a sprinkle of spice, brought warmth to dishes meant for the king. Kalen watched from his throne as Erendor worked, his dark eyes hidden beneath a hood of shadow. The Alpha King was a man of few words, but the slightest flicker of interest in his gaze did not escape the Omega. Erendor felt the tension every time he served the food. One wrong move, one burnt dish, and the king's judgment could be unforgiving. "You are improving," Kalen said one evening, his voice low and almost distant. "The soup today, it has warmth, not just flavor." Erendor froze, spoon in hand. "Thank you, sir," he murmured. He had not expected such words. Praise from Kalen was rare. "You do not fear failure, Omega?" Kalen asked. He did not smile, but there was curiosity in his tone. Erendor shook his head. "I fear it, sir, but I fear it more in my past than here. I want to learn and I want to serve well." Kalen considered this, his dark eyes resting on Erendor's face. "Many fear me, Omega. Few face that fear with purpose. Perhaps there is strength in you yet." Erendor felt his chest tighten. Strength. The word seemed strange on his lips. He had spent years believing he had none. But here, in the shadowed kitchens of the castle, he felt the tiniest flicker of it. Days passed, and the routine of cooking and serving continued. Yet, life in the castle was never quiet. Courtiers moved in patterns like shadows, plotting and whispering, while Kalen remained untouchable, a pillar of power amid subtle chaos. One afternoon, while preparing bread in the cold morning air, Erendor noticed the frost-coated windows. Outside, the wind carried whispers from the forest, a reminder of the darkness that lingered beyond the castle walls. A small spark of unease tickled his mind. Something in the air felt wrong. It was not long before that unease became reality. A courier arrived, pale and trembling, carrying a message sealed with the royal emblem. Erendor watched as Kalen broke the seal, his face darkening with every word he read. "The curse, it stirs again," Kalen muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The shadows of the past will not rest." Erendor had heard rumors of the curse. Whispers said that generations ago, a spell had been cast upon the royal line, a darkness that preyed on weakness, testing the strength of every ruler. Many had fallen to it. Kalen had survived. And now it seemed the curse was awake once more. "You will not fear it," Kalen said suddenly, turning to the Omega. "But you will help. Your knowledge, your skill may be the key." Erendor swallowed. I do not understand, sir," he said. "You will," Kalen said. "In time. But for now, stay close. Observe. Learn." Even in fear, Erendor felt a strange thrill. To serve the king now was no longer just about cooking. It was about being part of something larger, something that could change the fate of the kingdom. That night the castle seemed quieter, yet more alive than ever. Erendor moved through the shadowed corridors, carrying a tray of food for Kalen. The Alpha King had requested him personally, a rare honor that left the Omega both nervous and proud. Kalen sat in the throne room, a single candle flickering by his side. His eyes, usually unreadable, held a storm beneath their surface. Erendor set the tray before him, and the king's gaze lingered on the food for a moment, as though assessing the soul behind it rather than its flavor. "You grow more skilled," Kalen said finally. "But skill is not enough. Courage, loyalty, they are needed too." "Can you offer these, Omega?" Erendor felt his hands tremble slightly. I will try, sir," he whispered. Kalen nodded, a motion slow and deliberate. Good, because you will need them. The curse is patient, but it is cruel. It does not forgive weakness. Over the next days, the castle became a place of subtle tension. Erendor continued his duties, yet he began to notice changes in Kaelin. The king was not merely observing his cooking, he watched Erendor himself. Every careful movement, every quiet gesture seemed to draw Kaelin's attention. And though Kaelin remained distant and formidable, there were fleeting moments, small, almost invisible, when the armor of authority cracked to reveal something deeper. One evening, Erendor was arranging herbs in the pantry when a voice broke the silence. "Do you always work so quietly, Omega?" He turned to see Kaelin leaning against the doorway, his eyes dark and unreadable. Erendor's heart raced. I do not wish to disturb anyone, sir," he said. Kaelin smiled faintly. "Disturb? No, but you have presence, Omega. Even in silence you are noticed." Erendor felt heat rise to his cheeks. He had never been noticed for who he was, only for what he had failed to be. Yet here, in the shadowed pantry, the king's words were a quiet kind of acknowledgement. Days later, the first true test of Erendor's courage came. A cold wind swept through the castle as a strange, flickering shadow appeared near the gardens. Rumors of the curse had always been whispered, but Erendor had never imagined he would see even a hint of it. The shadow moved unnaturally, curling and shifting with a life of its own. Kaelin stepped forward, but the shadow recoiled, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. Erendor felt fear grip him, yet he also felt something else, a strange sense of purpose. He remembered the herbs he had learned about in the village, the old remedies whispered by elders, the small knowledge that might protect life. He moved toward the shadow, carrying a bundle of special herbs. "Stay back," he called softly, though his voice did not carry the usual confidence he longed to feel. The shadow hesitated, as if sensing the Omega's courage. Then, with a sharp hiss, it lunged. Erendor scattered the herbs and the pungent scent filled the air. The shadow shrieked, twisting in the wind before finally dissipating into smoke. Kaelin stood silently, watching, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he approached Erendor, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You have courage," he said simply. "Few would have dared, few would have tried." Erendor felt a swell of pride mixed with fear. He had faced something beyond his understanding and survived, but he also knew the danger had not truly ended. The curse was patient and the shadows of the past had only begun to stir. "Why do you help me, Omega?" Kaelin asked suddenly. "You are small, quiet, rejected by the world, yet you face this without hesitation." Erendor hesitated. "Because I do not wish to see you fall, sir. And perhaps because I wish to be more than I was yesterday." Kaelin's gaze lingered on him, and for a fleeting moment the walls of the castle seemed to melt away. "Perhaps there is more to you than even I suspected," the king murmured. That night, as Erendor returned to the kitchens, he felt a strange weight in his chest. It was not fear nor pride, but something new, a connection, fragile yet undeniable, between the lonely king and the Omega who had once been nothing. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Erendor prepared a simple meal for the king, thinking of the day's events and the bond that had begun to form. The castle was no longer just a place of fear. It was a place where courage, skill, and perhaps even trust could grow. But as he finished cooking and carried the tray toward Kaelin's chambers, a shiver ran down his spine. The wind outside howled through the towers, carrying a whisper that made the hair on his neck stand. The curse was not done. The shadows were still moving, still watching, waiting for the moment to strike again. Erendor took a deep breath, steadying his hands. Whatever came next, he knew he could not run. Not now. Not when the king and the kingdom needed him. And deep in his chest, a new thought took root. Perhaps he had a place here after all, not just as a cook, but as someone who could make a difference. And as the candlelight flickered on Kaelin's dark eyes, Erendor realized the bond between them had begun. A bond built on trust, courage, and unspoken understanding. a bond that would be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The night closed around the castle, cold and silent, but in the kitchens, in the shadows, and in the hearts of those who dared to hope, a spark of something stronger than fear burned quietly, waiting for dawn. The castle was quieter than usual. Snow had begun to fall outside, covering the towers in a soft, white blanket that reflected the pale light of the moon. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of burning candles and herbs. Erendor moved quietly through the corridors, carrying a small tray of tea for Kalen. Even after weeks in the castle, the Omega still felt the pull of unease in every shadow. He reached the king's chamber, pausing for a moment to steady his hands. Kalen sat by the window, the candlelight casting long shadows across his face. His dark eyes, usually guarded and unreadable, seemed heavier tonight, weighed down by something invisible. "Your tea," Erendor said softly, placing the tray on the small table beside the king. Kalen glanced at him, his gaze sharper than a blade. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low, almost tired. "Sit, if you wish." Erendor hesitated. Sitting in Kalen's presence was unlike sitting anywhere else. There was a tension in the air that made the walls seem smaller, the shadows longer, and his own heartbeat louder than usual. But he did as told, settling on the floor near the king's chair. "You have grown comfortable here," Kalen said after a moment, his eyes not leaving the window. "Yet you do not know the half of what waits in these walls." Erendor's stomach tightened. I am ready to learn, sir, whatever you wish to teach me." Kalen turned to him then, his expression softened, though still heavy with the weight of command. "You are brave, Omega, perhaps braver than you know, but bravery is not enough to survive this place, not alone." Erendor nodded, unsure what to say. He had felt fear all his life, but here, with the king, it was different. It was mixed with something else, a pull he could not name, a fascination he could not ignore. "You saved me once," Kalen continued, his voice quiet. "From a shadow that would have hurt me." He paused, as if testing the words. "I do not forget such things easily." Erendor looked down, ashamed that he could not meet the king's eyes directly. I only did what I could, sir. I do not deserve your gratitude." Kalen's gaze pierced him. "Do not lie to me, Omega. You risked yourself. That is not something one does lightly. That is strength, courage, and care." The word lingered between them like a fragile flame. Erendor felt it stir something deep within, a warmth he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He wanted to tell the king everything, of his past, of the family that had rejected him, of the fear that had haunted him since childhood. Yet the words stayed lodged in his throat, and all he could do was sit quietly, listening to Kalen's steady breathing. For a long while they remained like that, two figures in the candlelight, the snow falling outside as if the world itself held its breath. Then Kalen spoke again, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Tell me, Omega, why do you stay?" Erendor's heart skipped a beat. It was not a question of duty or survival, it was something more. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because I feel safe, sir. Safer than I have in years. And perhaps because I feel I am not alone when I am near you." Kalen's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, Erendor saw a flicker of vulnerability in the king's gaze. The armor of authority and fear had slipped just enough to reveal the man beneath, the lonely ruler who had survived betrayals, curses, and solitude. You are brave enough to speak such words," Kalen said slowly. "Most would not dare. They would hide behind flattery or fear." Erendor shook his head. I have no reason to hide, sir. I have nothing to protect but the truth of who I am." The king studied him for a long time, and then, with a sudden motion, Kalen stood. "Come," he said, holding out a hand. "Walk with me." The two of them moved through the castle halls, the candles flickering along their path. Erendor felt his chest tighten, the closeness of the king stirring something he could not name. Every glance Kalen gave him, every word he spoke, seemed weighted with meaning. And yet there was no pressure, no expectation, only an unspoken connection that grew stronger with every step. They reached the balcony overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The moonlight reflected off the ice and snow, making the world look fragile and beautiful. Kalen leaned on the railing, silent for a moment, watching the wind sweep through the frozen branches. "You face danger without hesitation," he said finally, turning to Urindor. "But there are dangers even I cannot control, and there are truths you must know before it is too late." Urindor felt a shiver run down his spine. I will face them, sir. Whatever you ask of me, I will do my best." Kalen's gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Your courage is rare, Omega, but it is not only courage I seek, it is trust. Will you trust me?" Urindor nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. I will, sir." I trust you." Kalen's hand brushed briefly against his shoulder, a fleeting touch, but enough to send a shiver through Urindor. The king's eyes held his own, searching, questioning, almost afraid to admit the truth he felt. For a long moment they stood in silence, the snow falling softly around them, the world reduced to the space between two souls. Then Kalen spoke again, his voice quieter, almost a whisper. "I have lived a long time in shadows," he said. "I have trusted few and I have lost more than I can bear. But perhaps with you, Omega, I might find something worth saving, even myself." Urindor felt his heart ache at the words. He had always dreamed of being seen, truly seen, for who he was, not as a failure, not as someone rejected by the world, but as someone capable of care, of love, of courage. And now the king, the Alpha, the man feared by all, was admitting a truth he had never spoken to anyone. I will do my best, sir," Urindor said, his voice trembling, "to stay by your side and to help you in any way I can." Kalen studied him, and then, in a rare gesture, he placed a hand on Urindor's cheek. "You are brave and, I think, perhaps even kind. Do not let the shadows of your past convince you otherwise." Urindor's eyes widened, and he felt a warmth he had never known. It was not fear nor pride, but something tender and fragile, a connection that had begun to grow, a bond that neither of them could yet name. As the night deepened, Kalen and Urindor remained on the balcony, speaking quietly of fears, hopes, and memories long buried. Urindor told the king of his family, of the village that had turned away from him, of the shame and loneliness that had followed him for years. Kalen, in turn, spoke of the weight of ruling a kingdom, of the betrayals that had hardened him, and of the loneliness that had made his power both a shield and a prison. With every word, the distance between them seemed to shrink. The ice in their hearts began to thaw, replaced by something warmer, something more human. They were two lost souls, finding each other in a world of shadows, learning that even the strongest can be vulnerable, and even the weakest can be brave. Suddenly the wind shifted, and a strange whisper carried from the forests beyond the castle walls. Urindor shivered, sensing the presence of something unseen, something patient and waiting. "The curse," he whispered. Kalen's expression darkened, the fleeting softness vanishing. "It is not gone," he said. "It waits, and soon it will test us both. Your courage will be needed more than you know." Urindor nodded, his hands trembling slightly. He had faced fear before, but now it felt different. This was not just about survival. It was about protecting someone he had come to care for, someone who had begun to see value in him when the world had not. Kalen's eyes softened again, and he placed a hand over Urindor's. "No matter what comes," he said quietly, "we face it together. You are not alone." Urindor felt his chest tighten with emotion. For the first time he believed it. For the first time he felt that he mattered, not as someone cast aside, not as someone weak, but as someone who could stand beside the king in courage, in hope, and perhaps in love. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the gardens in white. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying both the promise of danger and the fragile hope of something new. Urindor and Kalen stood together, hand in hand, two figures against the darkness, ready to face whatever shadows the world would bring. But as the night deepened, a flicker of movement caught Erendor's eye, a shadow beyond the castle walls, shifting in the moonlight, patient and waiting. And in that moment, both men knew that the challenges ahead would not be easy. Yet despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, a single truth burned bright. They had found each other, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The snow fell silently, the castle walls held their secrets, and in the hearts of the Omega and the Alpha King, a fragile flame of trust and connection began to burn, a flame that might yet survive the shadows of the past. The castle was silent, more silent than Erendor had ever known it. Snow covered the towers, the courtyard, and the distant forest in a pure, blinding white. It should have been peaceful, but the air was heavy with unease. Even the flickering candles seemed hesitant, as if they knew what was coming. Erendor moved carefully through the halls, his heart beating faster than usual. For weeks, the whispers of the curse had grown louder. Shadows that did not belong had been seen near the gardens, strange flickers of light in the corridors, and a chill that no fire could chase away. Now, the warnings could no longer be ignored. He carried a bundle of herbs and remedies he had gathered from old texts and whispers among the castle staff. These were not ordinary herbs. They were rare, enchanted to calm restless spirits and shadows. He had studied them tirelessly, learning the properties of each, hoping that they would be enough to protect Kalen. Kalen met him in the main hall, his expression tense but resolute. The Alpha King's eyes, dark and commanding as ever, softened slightly when they fell on Erendor. "Are you ready?" Kalen asked, his voice quiet but steady. Erendor nodded, though fear still knotted his stomach. I will do my best, sir. Whatever comes, I will not leave your side." Kalen studied him for a moment, and then a rare smile touched his lips. "That is all I ask." Together, they moved to the courtyard, where the snow had settled thick and silent. The wind whipped around them, carrying whispers that felt alive, almost taunting. Erendor's hands trembled slightly as he spread the herbs in a circle, forming a protective boundary around the king. "You will need to stay inside the circle," he said, looking up at Kalen. "The herbs will not stop the shadows entirely, but they can slow them down." Kalen nodded, his expression serious. "Then we shall face them together." The air seemed to darken around them, the snow swirling as if stirred by invisible hands. A low hum filled the courtyard, growing louder and heavier, until a shadow began to rise from the snow-covered ground. It twisted and moved like smoke, its form impossible to define. Erendor's heart pounded. He remembered the first time he had faced such darkness, the fear, the uncertainty. But now he had something stronger. He had Kalen, and Kalen had him. Together they could face the shadows. The shadow lunged, and Erendor flung the herbs into the air. The pungent scent filled the courtyard, causing the shadow to recoil with a strange, almost painful hiss. Kalen stepped forward, raising his hand as if commanding the very air. The shadow twisted violently but did not disappear. "Erendor," Kalen shouted, "focus. The circle must hold." Erendor nodded, concentrating. He scattered the herbs with precision, feeling the energy of the spell rise in response. He whispered the old words he had learned from the texts, guiding the magic with his voice and will. For a moment it seemed as if the shadow would overwhelm them. It surged forward, dark and formless, threatening to break the circle. Erendor's hands shook, but he did not stop. He could feel Kalen's strength beside him, steady and unwavering. Together, their combined resolve pushed against the darkness. Then, with a final cry, the shadow dissolved into smoke, swirling into the night before disappearing entirely. The snow fell gently again, as if nothing had happened, but the air felt lighter, freer. Kalen lowered his hand, breathing heavily. He turned to Erendor, his eyes filled with something rare, pride, relief, and a quiet admiration. "You did it," Kalen said, his voice soft. "We did it together." Erendor felt a warmth spread through his chest, unlike anything he had ever known. Courage, trust, and care had combined to achieve what neither could have done alone. For the first time in his life, he felt that he truly mattered, not for what he could do alone, but for what they could do together. Kalen stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. "Erendor," he said quietly, "you have grown beyond what I expected. Not just as an Omega, but as a person capable of courage, wisdom, and loyalty. You have earned your place here." Erendor's throat tightened. "Sir, I only did what I could," he said, feeling both humble and proud. "I only wanted to help you, to protect you." Kalen's gaze softened further and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Erendor's face. "You have done more than help me. You have shown me that even those cast aside have value, that even those who think they are nothing can shine brighter than the strongest light." Erendor felt tears welling in his eyes, but he did not turn away. Instead, he let the words sink in, let the moment between them solidify. For years, he had been told he was worthless. And now, in the cold courtyard of the castle, standing beside the Alpha King, he felt the truth. He had a purpose, he had worth, and he had a place in this world. The snow continued to fall softly around them, blanketing the castle in quiet and peace. Kalen took Erendor's hand in his own, holding it firmly yet gently. The gesture was simple, but for both of them it carried more meaning than words ever could. "We have faced shadows," Kalen said, his voice quiet but steady, "and yet we are here, stronger, wiser together. Remember this, Erendor, no darkness, no curse, no fear can take that from us." Erendor nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "I will remember, sir, always." For a long while they stood together, hand in hand, watching the snow settle and the world grow calm. It was a quiet victory, but one far more profound than either could have imagined. The curse had tested them, threatened to tear them apart, yet in the face of darkness, they had found courage, trust, and an unspoken bond. Days passed, and life in the castle slowly returned to its rhythm. The kitchens were once again filled with warmth and the aroma of bread and stew. Courtiers whispered less, and the shadows in the halls seemed less threatening. Kalen remained the Alpha King, formidable and commanding, but there was a new softness in his gaze when he looked at Erendor. Erendor, too, had changed. The fear that had followed him all his life had been replaced with a quiet strength. He moved through the castle with confidence, not arrogance but assurance. He had found his place, not as someone rejected, but as someone who had proven his courage, his skill, and his heart. One evening, as the sun set behind the towers, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kalen called Erendor to the balcony. The air was crisp and fragrant with pine and snow, and the castle gardens shimmered in the fading light. "You have grown stronger," Kalen said, his voice gentle. "Not just in skill, but in courage and wisdom. I am proud of you, Erendor, more than you know." Erendor felt his heart swell. "Sir, I only followed your guidance. I could not have done this alone." Kalen smiled faintly, a rare and genuine expression that softened his stern features. "No, but you also believed when others would have fled. You faced shadows, danger, and even fear itself. That is what makes you remarkable. That is what makes you worthy." Erendor's eyes glistened in the fading light. I never thought I would feel worthy again, sir. But now, with you, I do." Kalen stepped closer, taking Erendor's hands in his own. The warmth of the king's touch was grounding, comforting, and infinitely reassuring. "Then stay with me, Erendor, not just as my Omega, but as someone I trust, someone I value. Together we can face whatever comes next." Erendor felt tears well up, not of fear, but of relief, joy, and gratitude. I will, sir. I will stay." The wind carried the soft rustle of the trees, the quiet of the snow, and the distant echo of life beyond the castle. For the first time in years, both Erendor and Kalen felt peace, not the absence of danger, but the presence of trust, courage, and connection. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the towers in a warm, golden glow, the two men stood together on the balcony, hand in hand. The castle, the snow, and the kingdom beyond seemed less like a prison and more like a home. The shadows had tested them. The curse had challenged them, but through it all they had found each other. They had found courage, trust, and a bond that could not be broken. And in the quiet of that winter evening, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the Omega and the Alpha King understood something profound. Together they could face any darkness, and together they could build a new dawn. The castle stood strong behind them. The world was still full of challenges, whispers of shadows, and tests yet to come. But in that moment, nothing mattered more than the bond they had forged, a bond of courage, trust, and something deeper, something eternal. Erendor smiled, resting his head slightly against Kaelin's shoulder. Kaelin's hand rested over his, steady and protective. And in that silent embrace, both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it as one. For even in a world of shadows, fire, and frost, light could be found. And that light burned within them, bright, unwavering, and eternal.